Sir, I'd like to get your reaction to what you heard from President Trump this morning as it related to a different storm, Hurricane Maria, and the tweets that we've been talking about where he diminished the death toll number, said he didn't believe them.
Well, I've heard many of those comments from the president the last few days. My advice to the president is this, and I'll give him my best retired military advice. You should never blame the survivors or the victim of a natural disaster for attributing to anything that happened to them. That's just bad protocol. Every first responder learned that. When you go get someone who should have evacuated, you hug them, you try to praise the fact that they live, and you take them to safety. But never should we ever talk about those who survive a natural disaster as if they did something to cause this to happen to themselves. Point two to the president. And if I was his boss or standing next to him as his chief of staff, I would kick him on the ankle and say, look, focus on the future damn storm. Stop looking in the rearview mirror. Focus on the future storm. Stop looking at the last storm. Avoid any conversations about the last storm. Focus on the future storm. That would be my advice to my president of the United States, because he's our president.
Couple questions to follow up on that for you. Do you believe there is a danger to the president, as you put it, looking to the past rather than looking to the future when it comes to people who right now are at a critical moment deciding whether to stay or go?
I think that's just nervous energy, probably saying things like that on Twitter. But I'm confident. I do think FEMA is fully focused. I think the governors who are in these storms, they're the principal leaders in storm response. It's not the president. What happened inside those states by our Constitution goes to the senior elected official, and they're in charge of what happens in those states. And from what I've seen, those governors are on it. They are mobilizing National Guard. They are executing agreements with other states to bring additional Guard assets in. And they've opened the way for federal troops to start deploying, to be prepared to come in, everything from ships to search and rescue helicopters all the way from Alaska. So the quarterback of this show is not the president. It's the governor of the state. They've got to ask for what they need, and it's the job of the federal government, FEMA, and all of government to respond and provide what those governors need. And that being said, I think the president will do well to start that message he talked about yesterday, warning people to evacuate, and that if the governors need something, the federal government would provide it. I think that's the message he needs to be on, and he'll be on better ground and take a lot of left's flack from some of this, looking back at the last storm.
General Honore, you've been very clear and explicit in your advice to President Trump. Why do you believe he is struggling to take that advice or use that?
I can't imagine. You know, he wasn't born a politician, but he sure in the hell act like one. Won't admit to nothing and deflects it. And I think that's something he needs to grow out of. You know, we have used Katrina to measure presidents. Did they have a Katrina moment? Meaning, wasn't paying attention to what was going on. Well, he had his Katrina moment. It's called Maria. And the picture everybody will remember is those paper towels going out and throwing them, and oh, by the way, giving himself an A. I think he needs to move on, and let's see, everybody can live and learn, and let's see if he can focus on Florence, stay off the damn golf course, and cheer these troops on who out on ships, out on sea, flying helicopters and airplanes trying to get ready to come while their families stay ashore and have to evacuate separately. We got a lot of young soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines out there that are getting ready to respond along with our National Guard. And that's the people he ought to be cheering on. And I hope to see him in North Carolina or South Carolina and not on a golf course this weekend.
General, before I let you go, one thing that has been striking when you listen to the response from federal officials, including, for example, Brock Long at FEMA, is talking about the lessons learned, and particularly the lessons learned from Katrina. Do you believe that the federal government has learned enough from the response to the storm to Katrina, which you know well, over the years? Are they at a better place now? Are they where they need to be?
Well, we went through the Obama years with let's wait for the governors to ask for the military to help. And now, after Maria, everybody sees, hey, we've got to start big storms. We can't wait for the governors to ask individually, hey, I'd like a ship to come in, or I want a hospital ship. It's incumbent on the National Security Council giving instructions to Brock Long how he get those assets to maneuver on the storm. Had we maneuvered on Maria like we maneuvered on Hurricane Irma, we could have done a better job in trying to get there earlier and helping people quicker. That being said, it's time to focus on this storm, and I hope that's what the National Security Council is helping Brock Long figure out how all of government can help respond, because the guy on the button is the governor.
Real quick, General, Brock Long and this investigation into his car use, do you think that's a distraction for him, or do you believe he'll be able to focus on the task at hand here?
I'm sure he's focused on this storm. I also sure it's a distraction, but he's young enough, he's hard enough, he'll get it done. He's focused on it. He's learned, and he learned a lot of lessons in Maria, Irma, and Harvey last year. So I think let's move forward, and all American people need to know, if you're told to evacuate, evacuate. Make sure you stay in communications with somebody, and don't leave a neighbor behind. If you're leaving and they're elderly, disabled, or poor, put them in a car with you and take them with you.
That's good advice. Retired Lieutenant General Russell Honore, it's a pleasure to have you and your perspective on the show. Thank you very much. Thank you for checking out our YouTube channel. Why don't you subscribe? It's really easy. Just click on that button down there. And for more news from MSNBC, click on any of these videos here for the latest interviews and highlights. You can get more videos from MSNBC with our newsletters. Head over to msnbc.com/newsletters to sign up.